Welcome to the WorldWild Podcast. I'm Miles Irving, and this week, of course, we're welcoming Deb Dana, who is the author of Polyvagal Theory in Therapy and also Polyvagal Exercises for Safety and Connection. And Deb is essentially bringing the very sort of scientifically grounded theory, polyvagal theory, into application, which is described as application in therapy in both of these books. But in fact, all of the stuff she's talking about are things that people could engage with and learn how to sort of get the best out of your nervous system or your life, your relationships, and so on through these applications of this profound theory. So I'm going to, in a minute, give a bit more of an introduction. I know we've touched on it in last week's podcast and in previous podcasts, but I'm going to give a sort of overview of the polyvagal theory. But also I'll make a brief reference to the other two guests on our podcast this week. So you've actually got 3 Irvings for the price of 1. So you've got my daughter Ella, who contributes to some quite interesting sort of applied work that Deb does with us in the podcast, and also some accidental object lessons about listening to your nervous system, which Deb draws out. It's quite funny. And then Alice Irving, my younger sister, who actually pointed me to the polyvagal theory in the first place a few years back. Alice does sort of coaching. She does relationship work and also work around listening in a family context. So, yeah, 3 Irvings for the price of 1. And a conversation with Deb Dana, which we'll get to shortly. So here's that introduction to the polyvagal theory. So polyvagal theory is essentially a description of how our neurophysiology works. I hope it doesn't sound too brain scrambling, but obviously, you have nerves, you have a nervous system, and that is part of the overall physiology, how the different bits of your body work together in various processes to keep you alive and functioning. So neurophysiological states are basically what we experience when we're talking about a state of mind or a kind of mood state, something like that. And polyvagal theory basically points to 3 different neurophysiological systems, and they all have something to do with safety and the opposite of safety, danger and threat. So the first system is what's called the dorsal vagal system, and that relates to extreme life threat. And it's a system that evolved with lizards a very long time ago. And what you'll see when a lizard is in extreme danger, it'll just act like it's dead. And in fact, it's not play acting, its body has shut down. Animals that are hibernating, people who faint, and in fact, people who defecate or are even sick through extreme fear, or just become frozen and can't move. Sort of. So its manifestation is basically immobilization. That might be total, as in extreme cases, a catatonic state, or it may be when you're just completely stuck. So the thing to realize is, although it evolves and its main example is extreme life threat, actually, when we find ourselves unable to respond or deal with a situation, then we will get into this immobilized state, it's also known as shutdown. So basically, when you're completely lost for words and can't express yourself in a social situation or some other situation you're finding challenging, that's immobilization. When you find that your body is like walking through treacle or glue or something, that's immobilization. That's the dorsal vagal state. When you're feeling just like you want to give up, you can't cope, and things like that. So obviously, in other words, depression would be a manifestation of this system. The next one is a slightly more modern, in evolutionary terms, a slightly more modern system, and it's the fight or flight system. And that's also known as the mobilization system. So this is what happens when you know that you have to take action, and it's, again, primarily a response to threat. So you're afraid, or you'll see danger, you see cues of threat or danger. And at that point, you either become aggressive, which is the fight part, or you become fearful or anxious, which is the flight part. But basically, adrenaline will stimulate your heart and your breathing, and all your blood will go to the extremities of your body, to the muscles, so that you are able to act. So that's, in other words, you are mobilized. So Dorsal vagal's immobilized, fight or flight, or the sympathetic response is mobilized. Now, the third one is what this is really all about in terms of there being a holy grail or a desired state, a desired place to be. And it's the ventral vagal system or the social engagement system. Now, this is a situation where basically we are able to connect because we feel safe. So two things need to happen to be in that state. The first is you're not having any of these cues of threat or danger happening. But that's not enough in itself. You also need positive cues of safety. And polyvagal theory outlines how our body language, and particularly our facial expression and the non-verbal cues of our manner of speaking. So it's not the words you're saying, but how you're saying them. And in a sort of sing-song lilt or vocal prosody, that's seen to be reassuring and a cue of safety, which we're actually evolved to pick up on and feel safe if people are speaking in that kind of sing-song voice. Whereas a monotone voice is actually a cue of threat. Or danger, and also lower voices. So the men really have to work, especially if they have deep voices, on not being threatening, because those bass notes are actually associated with the sound of a predator. Just as high screeching noises are also cues of other kinds of danger. So this middle range vocal prosody thing is a cue of safety. Smiling is a cue of safety. The little crinkles by the side of your eyes are laughter lines. When you're genuinely engaging with someone, you can't help but have those little crinkles, and quite unconsciously you pick up on that as a cue of safety. And that brings me on to something else, which is neuroception. It's a very important concept, but basically neuroception is an unconscious form of perception whereby you are picking up cues of safety or threat and danger from your surroundings, in particular from other people, and from your own body. So you're sort of checking in with your body to see whether your body itself is picking up on any cues of danger. Now, the trouble is when people, and this is kind of all of us, have suffered trauma in the course of our life to a greater or lesser extent, you get this kind of scrambled neuroception, which is basically that your body is perceiving threat or perhaps perceiving slights from other people or insults or rejection or something like that, when in actual fact, no such intention is there or no such danger is there, but our body is misreading cues. So that's basically called faulty neuroception. And one of the goals of therapy in this polyvagal lens is to reprogram your nervous system so that you can pick up on cues of safety which are there and not falsely assign cues of danger to an environment where they're actually not there. And that's very important because the most important part of the theory, as I said, is the social engagement system. That's the ventral vagal system as opposed to the dorsal vagal. So polyvagal is so called because you have both ventral and dorsal vagal. The dorsal is the shutdown immobilization bit, and this ventral vagal is the social engagement system. So being able to read cues of safety means that you can enter into a space described as co-regulation. So people smiling and speaking in a sing-song voice, and otherwise giving cues to the other person's neuroception that they are safe to be with, enables bonding to happen or the forming of emotional bonds. And it means basically that you're safe to approach. So neuroception evolved because it's important to know whether another animal is safe to approach or not. So it evolved in tandem with this capacity to co-regulate. So we just have this amazingly sophisticated ability to soothe and reassure one another and to gather one another in so that we can become close, and then we can share this safe space in which, it's important to emphasize, your nervous system is optimal functioning. So you can now think more clearly, you can feel good, your immune system works better. This is a sort of seat of creativity, the social engagement system. So that's a bit of a brief, perhaps not so brief, summary of the polyvagal theory. Obviously, the interest in terms of this podcast is in the ability of our nervous systems to connect. And the polyvagal theory is primarily oriented around the connection with other people. But what's being described is the neurophysiological apparatus that we have for connection per se. So that's obviously highly relevant. And there's a few things that are touched on in this conversation about where all of us feel safe and in that ventral vagal state. And it's not always whilst having a beer with your mates or a cuddle with your girlfriend or your kids or something. There are references to other things basically giving rise to that ventral vagal state. And in fact, I mentioned in terms of an activity that makes me feel socially engaged or in that connected ventral vagal state, that of cooking a meal. And I think it's a really interesting thing to look at how different activities are actually bonding us to our surroundings. Obviously, when the theme that runs through more podcasts than not for WorldWild is foraging itself, the gathering of wild plants. And when we gather the plants, that's an activity that can definitely bring us into that ventral vagal thing, especially when you know a place, you're familiar with the plant, and you've just learned to enter into that space. I must say, because I've had days when I'm rushing around trying to gather stuff for restaurant orders, there's times when I've missed that completely, which is a bit sort of tragic. But these days, especially having done yoga and a lot more of this stuff around polyvagal theory, I'm realizing that just the simple act of gathering nettles or something like that is better than yoga. It's better than any mindfulness practice, because these are activities which we're evolved to do, and so find ourselves, touching the plants and being present in these kind of spaces in an activity that's just as ancient can be. It's very, very settling and grounding, and you do feel that you are connecting to places and plants. And obviously, taking it home and cooking, I've gradually been dawning on me that we'd build up relationships with ingredients, most of which are coming from living things, one way or another. And so a relationship with a plant that we cook with often. I'm experimenting a lot with hogweed, for example, at the moment, and finding that my relationship is deepening with that particular plant. And so it made me think about a previous podcast episode where we talked about mental health and the kitchen and the restaurant industry. And just talking this episode through with Joel earlier on today, we really hit on an important point, which is another aspect of the polyvagal theory, that one of the things that is triggering threat in terms of our social structures these days is that of evaluative judgments. So there are quite a lot of contexts in which the overall culture and sort of atmosphere of the place or the industry or the institution is one of evaluative judgment. And that makes us feel that we're under threat. It basically puts us into a mobilized state, and everything we're doing is trying to come up to the mark so that we don't get, put down the pecking order, you might say, or not seen suitable for promotion, or you won't get that grant funding, or you won't build up your reputation so you get the next better job. So that's not at all conducive to the social engagement system. It's not giving you a cue of safety. Stephen Porges talks about that within the academic context, that it's very much a context of evaluative judgment, and therefore not a very nice place to work unless you can find a way through that. But obviously, the cooking, the restaurant industry is one that is intensely evaluative. I just think about all of the TV programs that have been out and just stayed for years in the UK, at least, things like MasterChef and the Great British Menu, and it's quite clear that chefs are under a lot of pressure to basically show their skill set and to achieve in this very evaluative judgment kind of context. It'd be interesting to have a chef on and explore that in more detail. But I guess my train of thought was, here's this activity, and here's this industry with thousands of people that have developed this amazing skill set around this fundamentally bonding exercise of food, in the way that I'm describing it here. When you have a relationship with an ingredient, you're there with your hands, you're there with your memories and all of your senses, engaging with that ingredient to create dishes. And of course, there's all the relationships regarding the provenance of those ingredients as well, to do with land, ecosystem, producers, other people, and so on. And of course, the act of sitting down and gathering to eat for food is a profoundly social thing. And one important point to make is that you can't digest food very well if you're feeling edgy and in fight or flight. So the whole conviviality of food, where people sit down and feel relaxed and are bonding and have the cues of safety, means that your body can actually digest the food really well. So it just seems so important that the whole sphere of restaurants and people producing food and serving food and creating an environment to eat food should get past that overarching atmosphere, context, culture of evaluative judgment, and move into something where this bondedness, which is inherent to food, should come through. So that's a thought that I've ended up on, which perhaps grounds this particular episode a bit more in some of the ongoing themes. But hopefully, everyone listening has caught the earlier episodes where I've expounded a little bit more about why I'm going down all this sort of neurophysiological route at the moment. But in case you've missed that, it's just basically that this, as I've already mentioned briefly, this idea of connectedness and bonding, which is elaborated on so profoundly and in such detail and practical application by the polyvagal theory, is really relevant to our relationship to landscape, ecology, and other species. So, if we can understand this, then we're in a position to apply it to the overarching theme of the podcast, the theme of finding our way back home to landscapes, to find this active participation, this relational participation in landscapes, and also to find our way home into the communities in ways that express the wildness of our nervous systems, and not the kind of traps and spheres of control that are characteristic of modern life. And then lastly, to find our way home into our own bodies and see that safe space, that held space in the wild neurophysiology of our own bodies. Okay, so after that fairly long introduction, we'll now get on to this week's conversation with Deb Dana.
Ready when you are.
Oh, I was just saying that Alice and I, just by coincidence, we're both working our way through your polyvagal theory and therapy book.
Oh, nice. Nice.
So that's kind of partly why I thought it'd be great for both of us to be chatting. Alice actually introduced me to all this stuff some years back, got me connecting with the kind of somatic therapy stuff. But part of my background is I read psychology at university, but the whole kind of structure of how it's very much a medical model in the department that I studied in, and no mention of the kind of things that we're going to be talking about today at that point. Even the idea of therapy was very much sort of talking cures, and very rigid and formal. And I couldn't see a place in that for me. I was very interested in why do people suffer from mental health difficulties. My dad had a diagnosis of bipolar and was on lithium for I think the last 15 or 20 years of his life. And so I guess, we grew up being aware of these issues. I went to university to study psychology to get some kind of answers. The closest I got to an answer was probably it was a work by a guy called Peter Hobson, who'd written a book on autism, and he made this statement that the fundamental thing about being human is relatedness. Now, it's amazing to me that I read psychology for 3 years. And this was just peripheral reading. I just stumbled across that. It wasn't on our reading list at all. I just happened to find it. And this statement, the basic aspect of being human is relatedness. Now, of course, you go on to realize that that's the basic aspect of being alive, and if you're any kind of organism. But that just opened a door for me to start thinking. And he talked a lot about responsiveness and early childhood development and so on. So that was my first sort of sense that there was something within an academic discipline, loosely known as psychology, that would make some sense to what actually was going on in actual people's lives, such as my own. But yeah. So years later, to find out that you guys have been working on this incredibly rich stuff around polyvagal theory, and wow, it's a whole other world that we didn't dare dream existed, quite honestly. So
I'm glad you've become part of the polyvagal community. That's lovely.
Yeah. Did you want to say something, Alice, by way of what's your... No? Okay.
By way of arrival, you mean?
Oh, yeah, by way of here I am and this is me, yeah.
Well, I received a phone call at 9 o'clock this morning, Deb. I'm halfway through your book on Audible, and I had a phone call from Miles, who's my older brother, saying, do you fancy coming and interviewing Deb Dana with me today? And I thought it's quite unusual to have an invitation to meet the author of the book you happened to, and it was unrelated to Miles's podcast schedule. So it's really delightful. My interest in this is similar to Miles's on a personal level, because of coming from a family of people who struggle, essentially, and wanting to get some perspective on that, and really looking for tools to navigate life in a more manageable way as an adult. And that in turn, as it often does, has led me to look for work in that area. So I work as a coach, and I'm also interested in parenting, and I also do relationship work. So really all about safety. And I loved what you said about right at the beginning of polyvagal theory and therapy. You lay out the role of neuroception, and that state precedes story. And that's one of the key things that I found so useful in working in the relational field, is that we get so caught up in the story. This child is bad, or this my partner is wrong, and actually what's happening is a neuroceptive response.
We've told our story just a little bit. Why don't you tell your story, even though I'm sure it's we could spend the whole time telling that, because you've been on the but just as much or as little as you fancy sharing, really, about how you ended up engaging with polyvagal theory.
So my story of becoming a passionate polyvagalist, which is like I like to say, and part of this worldwide community of polyvagal informed people, which Steve and I are hoping to keep building. You know, you talk about a global community of people in your network. We're looking to really, have people around the world understand, befriend their nervous systems, and then be able to use that connection to then connect differently as they move through the world. I was first introduced to polyvagal theory when I read Steve's first book. So that was around 2011 when his book came out. And I'd always been I'm a licensed clinical social worker. So as a therapist, I've always been interested in the way brains work, because I think that's what we're helping our clients work with. They're working with their brain systems. And when I found Steve's work, it was more on the lines of this, Dan Siegel's embodied brain experience, that, here's this whole nervous system that really is informing the brain. And for me, it was, that moment, that aha moment that we sometimes have when, now things make sense in a new way. And I wanted to learn more. So I was working with a group, and one of our frameworks was to bring trainings here to Maine. And so I emailed Steve and said, would you come? would just spend a few days with us and do a training so that we could understand polyvagal in a more deep way. And he came, and that was the beginning of sort of a collaboration, and now a deep friendship. And because he's a brilliant scientist, and really, without his development of polyvagal theory, none of this would happen. And I then, I'm the one that has been lucky enough, blessed to be able to take his scientific work and turn it into, easy to use concepts that therapists use, and now taking it out into the broader world for, just curious human beings, people who are working in different areas. And so it's become sort of the way that I see the world. I see the world through the lens of the nervous system, which, in some ways makes it a much easier way to look at the world. Be somebody out there, and first you know where your nervous system is. Are you regulated or not? And then you look at the other person, and it's the same. Are they regulated or not? Are they feeling a biological state of safety or unsafety? Not because safety is not a cognitive experience, right? Safety is an embodied experience, and polyvagal theory gives us the roadmap to understanding those things. So, my life changed, and it's been a wonderful adventure since that moment. And now, since we've all gone online because we can't, be in that relational connection except through screens, I'm kind of figuring out, so, okay, how do I keep teaching online? Because there's a huge interest in this around the world, and especially in this time that we're in right now, because understanding how our nervous systems are responding to social distance, to sheltering in place, to disconnect, and how we're going to re-enter the world in a safe way, I think is really driven by our nervous systems. And so understanding our own systems and being able to help others understand theirs, I think is a call to action right now.
Yeah. And when you say about the embodied state rather than cognitive, it's something the penny only dropped this week. Just listening to somebody talking about this, because they pointed out that when we're experiencing our body, we're not using words. That was a bit of a pivotal moment for me when they made that statement. I thought, aha, so that's what's going on. I'm dropping out of this verbal thing going on in my head, and now I'm just feeling my body. And
through the polyvagal lens, you're feeling, when you're in that state that we call ventral vagal, which is the place in your nervous system that brings you the capacity for regulation and safety and communication and connection. That connection that we feel is an embodied connection. It's a connection to what's happening for us, our all of the parts of us that live inside us. But it's also this ability to be in connection with others, like the four of us are doing now, and the ability to be in connection with spirit, and the ability to be connected with nature and the world around us. So it's your biology that supports that capacity or limits that capacity, because when we leave that state of ventral, when we move into one of the two survival states that our nervous system has, either sympathetic, which is that intensely mobilized need to take action, fight or flight, or the dorsal vagal, immobilized, collapsed, give up, shut down place, we no longer can be in connection to any of those domains. So our ability to connect with the world, to the earth, to nature, and really be nourished by that connection is taken away when our biology leaves ventral. So it's an important place to know how to get to and to know how to return to, because we all leave it many times a day. The goal for well-being is not to always be anchored in that ventral vagal place. The goal is to know when we're leaving it and how to return. I call it home. We talk about connection. That I call ventral vagal our home, right? That's our home. And how do we return home to that place that then allows us to feel home with others and with nature and with spirit?
I love the fact that you are calling it home, because as I communicated in that email I sent, I've been working with ideas around what it means to be home. And you know, people who listen to the podcast have heard me kind of rehearse this several times, but you know, it's that home or a dwelling place is our body. It's also the interpersonal space, and it's also the landscape. But the polyvagal stuff seems to create a way of understanding all of that, because I mean, one of the things that I find fascinating is when we talk about being in our bodies, like in that ventral vagus thing, where we're actually at home and at rest and at ease in our body. It's almost like a social space between our presence and the body that embodies our presence. You know, it's like we're kind of friends with our body, sort of thing. So that in itself is social. But the other thing I find really interesting is that because I'm in my body, I'm now also in your presence. Whereas when I'm not in my body, I'm not. When I'm not with myself, I'm not with you. I'm not sure I'm able to quite articulate what I'm trying to say. It just seems paradoxical that the idea of connecting with me is then connecting with you, and the idea of connecting with you is then connecting with me. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, you know, Steve once said that trauma is a chronic disruption of connectedness.
Right.
And I think, you know, he was talking about, you know, nervous system to nervous system. And I think we could also expand that to think when we feel disconnected from the world around us, from environment, from feeling at home in ourselves or in the world, it's a traumatic experience for us. And, you know, you talk about me being home here so I can connect with you and be present for you. That's, you know, we go back to, you know, Alice's talk about neuroception. That's really how our nervous system is sending cues out into the world that either I'm here and you're welcome to approach me, or I'm in one of those survival states and don't get near me, which would be the sympathetic, energized fight or flight. I'm sending you cues of danger. Or if I go into that dorsal place of disconnect where I'm sort of untethered from the world and untethered from my experience, then the cues I'm sending out into the world are ones of, you know, don't bother to try and find me. I'm sort of out here floating and I'm not really available for even the connection you might find in sympathetic. So it's neuroception, the way that the nervous system takes in these cues that starts this whole process. And your neuroception works inside, outside, between is the easiest way to think about it. So it's scanning inside your body all the time. Your neuroception is listening to what's happening inside your own body. And then it's listening out into the environment. What's happening in this environment I'm in? And then it's listening between nervous systems. So those are those three domains that neuroception is getting cues from, and is also sending cues to. And, you know, you talked about, you know, feeling at home in the world around us. I think when we enter an environment that gives us those cues of safety, then we enter into that space of feeling ventral and feeling that openness, that there's a oneness that can happen from that space, and I can feel safely grounded and anchored in the world around me, as well as other things. And I think that's important for environment, to find the environment that brings you that.
Yeah.
Where, you know, where you feel at home most fully.
I suppose the thing that I find most extraordinary or most wonderful is that our nervous system is evolved to. Could you? That's a bit distracting, Tony. Could you just find a way to settle? Thanks.
Keep slipping off the front of it.
Do you want to get a different chair then?
See, that's a great example of neuroception sending a cue of danger and then not being able to sit still because there's something that's not right. So now we'll try another chair. Ooh, that one looks comfortable. See how your nervous system responds to that one.
How's that, Ella?
Is that better, Ella? Yeah, so, and I love that both you were listening to Ella's response and being curious about what might be a solution, right? That was systems in connection, right? That was lovely. That was a lovely example of that. Thank you.
Well, it's also slightly grumpy dad thinking that's making me not able to relax.
So there's the repair, right? There's the repair. So Miles, if I could just stop there for a minute, that was beautiful because you noticed, here's what's happening with my nervous system.
Right.
And I just said that to the world. And then I made a lovely repair with my daughter, right? That is exquisite. And that's exactly the process that we want to have going on in the world. And so thank you both for just showing that so beautifully. Mm-hmm.
So what I was exploring there was just what you described before, that our nervous system is so exquisitely tailored in a way to fit with the biosphere, you know, our biological surroundings, and I guess, you know, you go beyond that to sort of climate geology and all of that, as well as this incredible social engagement capacity that we have for one another, because we have two nervous systems that are the same, but just because they're the same, you know, these cups don't necessarily fit particularly well because they're the same. So the point is our nervous systems do wonderfully couple together and fit and dance together. But the sense I'm exploring around environment and the outdoors and everything that actually it's not just like that I feel comfortable with my surroundings, but like I can find things to eat. I can find somewhere to create a home and so on. But my nervous system is perfectly developed to you know, and I love the idea of ecologically to talk about a niche, and it's a niche is like kind of this hollow that you kind of work your way into, and you lie down on the ground and you just work your way into that. It was kind of yielding to you like some soft earth, and it would take wolves do that. Brilliant. That's what they do, don't they? They lie down and do that. And then you've got this shape in the ground, and you've got you. Yeah, it's a perfect fit. Well, that's what we've done over millions of years. But the point for me is that what we end up with, you know, Stephen says a lot about being safe. I think there's a related sense of being comfortable. You know, when you're safe, you're comfortable, and that perfect fit means that we're comfortable. I just love it because it makes me feel like here we are in this biological world, this physical world. Here we are in this social world. Here we are in these bodies. But it's all intricately designed by this gradual shaping, mutual shaping, so that it just feels so good. It is so good. It all works together wonderfully, and it all boils down to the fact that our nervous system just is a perfect fit.
It's lovely. I love that. I love that sense of finding your way into that niche and feeling safe there. And because once your nervous system sends you cues of safety, then you can feel all those other things. You can feel comfortable, you can feel welcomed, you can feel joined, but it starts from your nervous system sending you those cues that, oh, okay, this is a safe moment, you know. So it's a lovely, it's nervous system. The wisdom in the nervous system is quite amazing, isn't it? Because it also, if you're, you know, walking through the world, it also sends you cues to watch out, to be on guard, that to, you know, maybe this isn't so safe, to be curious, to be all of those different things. And, you know, which is why I think, again, when we come back to befriending our nervous system, to knowing how does my nervous system send me cues and how has it been shaped over my lifetime, because then I can reshape it so that, you know, I can go out into the environment and find places I feel safe and
well, that's
fit
something
in that way.
Sorry, I cut you off.
No, go ahead.
So there's something really fun that I had a chat yesterday, and we were talking about we touched at different points in the conversation on on habits and then habitat. And I just had one of those little flashes of thinking, hang on a minute, that's the same word with. So I wrote it down just to check my brain wasn't playing tricks on me. No, that's definitely habitat. Right, that word is in that word. Good. So where can we go with that? That's fun. So, and then I thought immediately about your book. So, you know, a habitat is obviously where we habitually dwell. And then I mentioned this to my wife later, and she said, of course, we also inhabit. Brilliant. So now we've got home. That's great. We're dwelling, we're inhabiting. But I just thought, well, there's really something to do with that, because our habitat is where we conduct our habits, you know, and when we inhabit something, that's because we do the habitual things that we do. And anyway, I thought of your book and how so many different things that you're proposing that will help to help us to know where we are and how to get somewhere else. But you do all of this, or rather, you suggest all these procedures, which are essentially habits.
Yes.
And their little routes, their little ways home, their little, you know, and I just thought, well, that's like having, like, for us, we've got fields with badger trails going across them, and you could say, oh, that's where the badger goes. And you see this hole in the hedge, that's where the badger pushes in. So these habits
I love that.
are kind of routes. I just,
that's beautiful. Yeah, because our nervous system sets up predictable pathways, which we might call the nervous system's habits, right? And what I want to remember and have everybody sort of think about is that your nervous system has an inherent knowing of how to come home to ventral.
Right.
That lives in all of us. There is this inherent knowing about how to do that. And then over the course of our life, some of those pathways get obscured or get, if we think about a real path, the trees fall or the boulders come. And so it's harder to find the way home. Right. And so then we have these habits of moving into protection rather than connection. And yes, what my book talks about is how do we remove some of those obstacles and shape ourselves so that we find the way home again more easily, right? So it doesn't take quite so much effort to come home to ventral.
Yeah, because I suppose the other idea that I've been working around is kind of the opposite, the antithesis of home, the idea of sort of exile, But the bizarre thing is, normally when you're in exile, physically, geographically, you're somewhere else. But I've been trying to think of a way of describing it, because what does it mean and I guess dissociation is the best word we've got, but we're kind of here but not here. We're here but elsewhere, but we're not actually elsewhere. You're just not.
Yeah.
It's non-presence, like.
Right.
And that's a kind of weird one, to find your way home when you actually are here, but.
So I think when the nervous system is mobilized to leave ventral, because, and again, the nervous system always enacts an adaptive survival response. We always put the word adaptive in front of survival response, because the nervous system is neurocepting something unsafe in the environment, and has made the decision that your ventral vagal capacities will not keep you safe enough. So then it takes you away from home into one of these other two places, either sympathetic, mobilized fight, flight, or dorsal disconnection, where yes, we have that flavor of dissociation. We go to dorsal when we feel trapped. So if I can't physically escape, my system will take me to somewhere where I'm not really here anymore. So.
But isn't fight or flight also, in a sense, dissociation? Because you're not, when I'm in fight or flight, I guess I am feeling my body in a way, but I'm not present. I mean, isn't that also the case?
Well, you're present in a different way in sympathetic. You're present in a mobilized, I am going to take action here. And then in dorsal, you're not present because you can't take action. You've left the room, so to speak. So it's a different embodied experience.
Am I? If I'm in fight or flight, I can't be with you.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Once ventral, I've taken to calling it the active ingredient in our ability to connect, right? If you don't have some amount of ventral in your system, a critical mass of ventral in your system, then you can't connect, because your biology has said connection is now dangerous. So yes, when you go to sympathetic, whereas in ventral, I'm loving this and we are all, finding our way into friendship and connection. If I go to sympathetic, you're now my enemies. The world is an unsafe place and I have to fight to survive. So I'm either going to fight by being aggressive or fight by getting out of here, right? And then in dorsal, you don't exist. So I can't connect with you because the world doesn't exist and you don't exist. I'm off in my own space. So it's that kind of experience around the ability to be present and connect, which again is based on control. Go ahead.
Just as well as being you being my enemy, I find that I slip into this mode of you being my problem.
Yep. Right.
So for example, Ali, my wife, will be kind of sharing stuff with me, but unless I can respond really well, I find, oh no, Ali's worried again. What are the implications to this? I need to tell her something that's going to solve it. It's a classic thing. But I can see that that's coming out of my body state. We had an interesting conversation this morning where I recognized that. And I said, look, I realize that what I need to be saying is something that will respond and reassure you. But I'm feeling like this is a threat because you're anxious and I'm not sure I can help. And if you carry on being anxious, we're going to have difficulty collaborating on the tasks that we've got to do, because so it's kind of I just think that's interesting because it makes the world being a problem that needs fixing is actually a big part of how we approach the world. I think, like in terms of scientific paradigms and so on, and go, okay, if we could just solve this, then we'll be able to make it do what we want.
Right. So
if we can be present with this, then we can have this amazing reciprocal thing that will unfold, and we won't be in control, but we will be taken care of, kind of thing.
So, right, because in sympathetic, you were talking about, I have to solve, that's a problem I have to solve, right? And so I can't collaborate. This isn't about collaboration. This is about me solving that problem. And oftentimes you're the problem, so I got to fix you in some way, right? But in ventral, our problem solving is bringing curiosity, and we collaborate, right? Yeah. So in ventral, there's no one end in mind, right? In sympathetic, I know what needs to happen. In ventral, it's like, wow, there are lots of options here, right? So you can see the power of ventral to make the world an amazing place, a safer place, and out of safety comes, I mean, I work with individual people, and when we come to ventral, all of a sudden they're coming up with solutions to the problem they brought to therapy that we never would have thought of, right? But it lives inside their system, and here it comes. So the same is true for, solving, scientific problems from a place of ventral, looking at the world and the environment and climate. I don't know what's going to happen, but from ventral, the stories are ones of possibility.
That's brilliant. Yeah.
Do you ever spend any time thinking about the policy implications of polyvagal theory? You said you come from a social work background. It does seem like if only we could put everyone into ventral vagus mode, everything would be okay. Some people like to think about that all the time. And is that, do you have any interaction with that kind of side of things?
Yes, and more now that the world is changing, and Steve and I are collaborating around trying to bring sort of structures, polyvagal informed structures, to other systems, to the medical world, to the legal world, to the academic world, because it's applicable everywhere. Everybody has a nervous system, and the nervous system is running the show wherever we go. So could we find a way to, have systems, big systems, be polyvagal informed? Because once they're polyvagal informed, they're going to organize themselves differently. So it's not so much that I have to teach a system how to do it. I just have to help a system become polyvagal informed, befriend their nervous systems, and then they're going to figure out how do we do this differently, right? So yes, we are spending a lot of time recently trying to expand from, I started with one-on-one counseling and then groups, and now I teach, and now online, and Steve's, doing the same with trying to really create this polyvagal informed community worldwide, and including big systems in that, because if you look at any system and say, and you can see how polyvagal informed would I call it, and the more polyvagal informed it is, the healthier it is for everybody, for the employees, for the people it serves, for the world around them. So yeah.
I love that you're using the word systems so much. I think that's really really useful word. I had a question that kind of leads on from that, just in terms of what polyvagal theory actually brings as a perspective, and whether you found that it, because it's so much a kind of formalization of what we intuitively know. It kind of gives you this very easy to understand and what your book does is makes it easy to navigate map for what we live daily, as you said. And I'm just curious whether you feel that it brings any new insights of its own, or whether it really just works as a very useful map for what we already know.
Yeah, it's probably a both and for me, because really what polyvagal theory does is bring into, or give you a way to bring into explicit awareness what's going on inside, and what's going on in relationships. And once you understand the biology of your connection, then you can stop being stuck in the story, because the nervous system doesn't assign motivation, right? It simply acts to keep safe. And then we humans make up stories about why you're doing something or why I'm doing something. So in that way, my goal is to help people understand the workings of their own nervous system so that they can become active operators of those systems. Because I think once I feel like I have some management over my system, I understand it, I can see where it's taking me, I have some ways to shape it, then I feel like a more, I don't know, I'm more, I don't know what the word is for me.
You have more agency?
Yes, I have more agency. Thank you. And, for many of us, that sense of agency is missing. For trauma survivors, certainly the sense of agency is missing. But even for many of us now in this current time of pandemic, this sense of agency is missing. So if I can, really work with my nervous system to figure out, what I say is, what would nourish my nervous system in this moment, I think is the question I like to ask. And then how is it possible for me to find some way of nourishing it in that way? Because the ways I used to do, 3 months ago, are no longer available to me. If we talk about where my soul feels at home in the environment, it's by the ocean. Right, I need ocean, and ocean is, like a 5-minute drive from my home here in Maine, but the roads are all closed because the beaches are closed at the moment, because we live in a place where too many people want to come and be by the ocean. So even though it's there, I can't get there. And so what I would have done before to nourish my system, I can't do now, but I can hear the sea, so I go listen, or I bring up the memory of being there. So, in those ways, I think when we understand our nervous system and understand what nourishes it, we can find a way to be safe and nourish our systems, even when things are restricted. So I think for me, that it is helping us understand what's going on inside and bringing what is implicit into explicit awareness, which then makes it available for us to to work with. If it stays implicit and I just have that longing for the sea but can't get there, and I don't bring it to awareness, I'm gonna feel bad about that. I'm gonna dysregulate. Something's gonna happen. But if I bring it into explicit awareness, then I can work with it.
And you're going to make a story about something else being wrong when actually you're feeling
Exactly.
that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
And we see that all the time, don't we? If you listen to people's stories, it's so fascinating. You think, oh, what state is that story coming from? Because you can tell when it's a ventral story. My ventral story is, wow, I get why I can't go to the beach right now. And what are some other ways that I can connect with the sea? It's a ventral story. My sympathetic story is going to be that I'm really angry at the world for taking my beach away from me. And then my dorsal story is going to be one of despair that, wow, beach is gone for me forever. Give it up, right?
It's been really fun watching people's responses on social media to the pandemic, and they think they're talking and telling the world about what they think about the pandemic, but actually what they're writing about is their state and their trauma patterns, and that's what's being laid out in great detail. Exactly.
And those three stories, because those three states are always working in your nervous system, you always have access to at least three stories. Right? It just depends on which one is taking up the most room in your system and which one you want to focus your attention on. So, is that sense of, being able to shift. I can shift out of that sympathetic story of this is really unfair and everybody should just stay away from my beach. I can shift out of that story when I know that, oh, I'm sympathetic and I know how to come home to ventral. So I love story. I'm a writer. I love words, and I like listening to the autonomic story rather than what the brain's doing with it.
I suppose I just thought of something a bit contrary there. I was just thinking, what if the ANC had got all ventral vagal in the time of apartheid? I was just thinking, like, the power of anger and the fight or flight thing that sometimes, it's a good job people didn't get.
So let's talk about that for a minute, because that's a beautiful thing to sort of get a little more clarity and detail around. So when I am in ventral, and there's this piece of your nervous system that's called the vagal brake. And the vagal brake is this lovely circuit in the ventral vagal system that goes to your heart and regulates your heart rate. And if I want to be powerful and make a stand and take action from a place where I am not going to then activate everybody else's survival response, I need to do that from standing in ventral.
Right.
With my vagal brake having released enough to allow sympathetic mobilizing energy into my system, but to not have gone away so that I'm now in fight flight. So with a nervous system that can do that, I can be strong, I can stand my ground, I can make my case, but I do it in a way that your nervous system doesn't feel afraid of me.
That's beautiful, because that is the answer that we need now. There's so much going on, and like, I don't know if you are aware of it's something happening much in the States, but the Extinction Rebellion movement around climate change, which is basically, I think, I don't know about polyvagal theory as such, but one of the things that seems to be so different about this movement is that it's about, we have to be, it's what you just said, really. It's doing its best to be ventral vagal. So we had protests going through Canterbury, the nearest city to us. And the thing is, it was on the one hand, there was a coffin with it was the biosphere, we were going to have the funeral for the biosphere because of the threat of extinction. And so in a sense, it was very somber and quite sort of dorsal. And some of the motivation behind it is people are very angry about climate change. But the thing had music and dancing and laughter and humor. So it was like this, it was this ventral vagal event. going through town. Like people were trying to get angry with us, but there was so much smiling and civility, you know. So I.
Yeah.
Do you remember that like they were like really strict about no getting angry, because this one lady came up and started shouting at us, and she was like, wait till the results of Brexit are over and then start protesting. And all these men were like swearing at her and like, it's not about Brexit, you effing and then what, like all the like leaders were like telling them to be quiet, and then like they just stopped, and like no one was allowed to be angry or anything.
Yeah, we all had to be friendly. That's right. Friendly protest, yeah. So it makes me realise that the very thought that you're saying there has become really strongly rooted in this particular movement, and like people have been talking for a long time about, you know, activist burnout and so on, and that's because, you know, you are to a certain extent motivated by anger, rage, really, against the system being so life, you know, denigrating, and yet unless you're yeah, well, as you put it, unless you're ventral vagal yourself, you're not going to be an effective challenge to the system. Yeah, unless
right. So you're gonna suffer the effects of being enraged and sympathetic in your own physiology, and then you're going to activate other people to be in a survival response because you're putting cues of danger out into the world, so you can't be effective. I like to call ventral vagal an unopposable force. You know, that when there's enough ventral in me and in my surroundings, and then it's an unopposable force. I can meet the most angry person, and if I can hold that ventral, their system begins to feel it.
Wow.
So what is some, if so as a practitioner, I've realized that probably the most important, most valuable thing that I have to offer to anyone that I work with isn't really what I say or the knowledge that I have. It's the state of my nervous system that I can show up with. So I've become very interested in the shape that my nervous system is in, and I'm really increasingly interested in this idea that if my autonomic nervous system is really strong, then I can just really do anything that I want to do. So what are some really good ways of cultivating a strong ventral vagal state and making that more available and more accessible?
Yeah, so you know, for people who really want to begin to befriend their nervous system, I would have them do that first map that's in the book, the personal profile map, because it really is your first landing in understanding, oh, these are my 3 states, and here is how they begin to come alive. And the 2 sentences that go along with each of those, I am and the world is, will give you a really clear view of how your nervous system moves you through the world from each of those states. So, you know, I would have people do that map, but for right now, because we're here with no maps, let me tell you about ventral vagal anchors, which I think would be a really lovely thing to do together, which are very simply who, what, where, and when of ventral for you. So want to do these with me?
Great.
Yeah?
Let's do it.
All right. So let's start with who. So who is a person in your life who, when you're around them or you think about connecting with them, your ventral vagal system comes to life? Who is a person?
I would say my children.
Beautiful.
Yeah, my children, my partner, my big sister.
Lovely. So you have a bunch of people. That's lovely. How about you, Miles? Who is a person who, when you're around them, your ventral vagal goes, oh, yes, now I'm here?
Well, this one.
Yeah, I can see that. That's really lovely. That's lovely. How about you, Ella? And it can, you know what I tell people is it can be a pet too. It can be a dog, cat, horse, one of those mammal pets, because sometimes those are the places that we feel that as well.
Or maybe my guinea pig Mimsy, because she's really affectionate. And when I've been crying, because one of our guinea pigs, her babies were born dead, and I went to the hutch and saw it, and I've been crying, and then Mimsy like crawled up and licked my tears away. It was so
Oh, how sweet. That's a lovely moment. So we all have a who, right? So then we go to a what. What is something you do? And this is just a little something, not a great big practice, but what is something that you do that brings you a moment of ventral, just a micro moment of ventral?
That's I think putting my face out the back door in the morning, just getting that kind of waft of the lilacs and the roses are out at the moment, and that
Yes. Oh, I'm right there with you. That was lovely. Yes.
Yeah.
How about you, Miles? What's a simple little what?
I think preparing a meal is good for me.
Nice. All right, I want to be out your back door with you, and I want Miles to be cooking for me. How about you, Ella? What's a what for you?
probably when I'm in the water, like when I'm swimming, or even when I'm in the shower.
Nice. So water's a what? That's beautiful. Yeah. So we have a who and a what. What's a where? Where's a place for you that you feel your ventral vagal system is welcomed?
For me, it's got to be outside.
Is there a certain space out there?
Well, I think somewhere with trees, somewhere with big trees, no people, no buildings, and maybe a river. Actually, there's lots of really sort of small, fast-moving rivers around this part of the world that run down through valleys. So these kind of wooded valleys with the sound of water. Yeah.
And it's a place you can easily get to.
And it's a place I can easily get to. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. How about you, Miles? Where's a where for you?
Same sort of thing, but when you asked the question, I thought of a particular place. There's a place in the woods near us. It's an old track that's worn down. So either side you've got big banks, and you can see people have been going up and down there, probably with horses for hundreds of years or something. But it's still, the track where we found that blackbird's nest the other day.
Oh, there, yeah.
So it's just such a beautiful space. Lots of different kinds of trees and mossy banks, and it's cool.
And your nervous system really feels nourished there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
How about you, Ella?
This sounds funny, but actually my friend Rachel from my old school, at her house, she has this like tree house where there's like this pine tree, and her dad's put like planks into the pine tree, so it's like a ladder, and you climb up it, and then you can like sit in the pine tree, and then there's a bridge like across into the tree house. And when I'm like in the pine tree, it's like really relaxing.
I love it. That's great. So we have 3 very different wheres, and they all feel wonderful to me. So who, what, where, then it's a when. When are the moments that, and that you feel your ventral come alive? And I will say, I don't know if I wrote this in the book or not, but I'm an early morning person. So I'm like a 5 a.m. person. That's my when. I love 5 a.m. before the world wakes up, and waiting for that first bird to sing and say good morning. So my when is an early morning. But when are your whens?
I think I'm probably the same with that. Like in fact, some of the sweetest times I find is sometimes I wake in the middle of the night and can't sleep, and I fight it. Not very often, but sometimes I think, okay, I'm actually not going to get back to sleep. I get up and just find my space, and then when I wake up properly and I resign myself to being awake in the middle of the night, I really find that space, and it's lovely.
That's lovely.
I think my when is slightly different. I was thinking on what occasion rather than what time of day. I also like early in the morning, actually. I love that moment of kind of finally climbing into bed after a good busy day, not an excessively busy day, of just that moment of like, And anytime that you're out and you hear live music, like proper live music, not like boom boom boom, but like melodic music, and it's there and there's like a real person playing real music, that's always like
beautiful.
Yeah,
beautiful. Those are all lovely. How about you, Elle?
I think I'm the same as Auntie Alice. I like going to bed, and then like often we have supper quite late, and I go, oh no, I'm not going to have that long to read before bed, because when I'm at school, I often go to bed at like 6:30 and just read until like 8. Because
that sounds like a lovely reading in bed. I love that. Yeah. So you've identified each of who, what, where, and when, and then the next step in using them would be to bring them alive, make sure that you connect with the who, what, where, when, and identify, here's a ventral vagal anchor, so that you begin to resource that. And then when you feel yourself slipping out of ventral, see if you can connect with either actual one of those anchors or even the memory of one of those anchors, and it will help your system come back into regulation. So it's a nice way, it's a simple way, I like to start with things that are just easy to access, easy to do. So that's what I would suggest.
And you said in the book, I think, and I might have misunderstood it, but what I think I heard you say at one point is that it's the great thing isn't to always be in ventral, but to be able to move between states, to be able to consciously move between those states. And it may you've kind of explained one way that drawing on the parasympathetic, the sympathetic, the fight or flight can be really useful. I'm curious what the dorsal vagal state can bring, and when and how you might want to move into that state, how you might want to consciously use that.
So yes, we want to remember that sympathetic and dorsal both have everyday ordinary roles for us. Sympathetic is involved in heart rhythms and breath rhythms and energy for our limbs and all that. And dorsal in its everyday role runs your digestion. So they can only do that when ventral is overseeing the system. Okay. So then one of the ways that dorsal becomes a very sweet experience is when ventral and dorsal work together, so that dorsal brings you into the immobilization, but ventral makes it safe to do that so that you can be safely still, which I just love that experience. I think of being outside in the environment somewhere, in nature somewhere, and just coming into that place of stillness, and feeling safe to do that. That's when dorsal's experience, is bringing the immobilization, but ventral is there with it, saying, oh yes, we can be quiet now. Right.
It's not actually a black and white. And this is one of the other questions that I had. It's not like you're only ventral or you're only like they do coexist.
Yes, they can coexist. They don't always, right? So when sympathetic takes me to a survival state, ventral's gone, and sympathetic is now running the show. Okay. Dorsal is in the background messing with our digestion, right? And then when dorsal takes over, sympathetic is, of course it's still there in some way because we're still breathing in our heart rate, but the qualities of ventral are no longer available to us. And then we have these blends. And then we also have a nuance. So if you think for a moment, in the foreground right now, think about foreground, background. In the foreground, I'm feeling a lot of ventral, right? And then if I look in the background of my system, if I listen in for a minute, I can find a flavor of dorsal, because that's sort of my habitual in the background place is some dorsal. And so look into your system and think, what's in the foreground and then what's in the background, because we always have that mix going on. So it's not just a black or white.
So I was walking last night and I went out quite late, so it was getting dark, it was coming dark as I was out, and I was just really enjoying it, and it was a valley and it was beautiful, and I'd not been there before, and it's near my new house, so it was lovely, and I was really pleased. But as it got darker, I started to think, I'm out on my own, like, is this completely safe? Of course it's safe, it's fine, but I could feel a kind of unease starting to kind of stir in my chest, and I was watching that, and that was when that question appeared, like, oh, can I be sort of kind of relaxed and blissed out and anxious
Yeah.
at the same time.
Yes. Yes.
So, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if we think about the vagal brake again, there you were in ventral and your vagal brake was releasing a little to allow you to feel some of that unease in the background. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. Oh, I'm loving looking at Miles and Ella. It's just a sweet picture. Yeah.
Having a little
You
dorsal
talk about
moment.
co-regulation. There you see it. It's beautiful.
And that's something that Stephen talks about, isn't it? That you can only hug someone because you've felt safe.
And only
is switched off for now.
right. He says, that our quest is to feel safe, but not only to feel safe, but to feel safe in the arms of another.
Yeah.
That's our quest, and that's what you and Ella are doing right now. Feeling
So
safe.
he calls that immobilization without fear, doesn't he? Because
and that's that ventral and sympathetic working together. Allows you to join in a hug and rest in each other's arms, and it even allows us to simply be quiet, sitting with someone without a need to talk. Right, all of those experiences are that dorsal working.
ventral dorsal, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked around a little bit after Miles invited me to join you today, and one of the questions that came up a couple of times from therapist friends was, and it was a question that I had as well, how do you work with, so it came from, one was relational, how do you, when you kind of get into a fight and your loved one gets really shut down, and this actually happens in our relationship, it's me, and all the things that would normally work to come back into connection are just completely unwelcome and sort of drive me further into disconnection and shut down. And the question came in from a different angle. Someone was saying, what about someone who's got a disorganized attachment or quite a lot of relational trauma at the early stages of therapy? Which I think is the same kind of situation, where calling on quite extreme shutdown and defensiveness. How do you work with that in the moment?
Yeah, so I've come up with a what I call the safety danger equation, and what really it means is there have to be more cues of safety than danger in the moment for the nervous system to be able to come into connection to do whatever it is we're trying to do. And in the beginning, it's really the process of identifying concretely, sort of, I would, if you were my client and you've gone into that dorsal place, first of all, I'm not going to say, come back. I'm not going to say, what are you doing? I'm going to say, that's not helpful, right? Because that's ridiculous.
Stop it.
Stop it. Somebody, the image of a turtle gone into its shell is sort of a dorsal experience. And somebody a while back, and I use it all the time now, said, so if you wanted that turtle to come out of the shell, you wouldn't shake it, right? And you wouldn't knock on its shell and say, come out now. So this is what we're doing with people that have gone to dorsal. I just say, I'm right here with you. And we're going to find our way back to enough ventral so that we can begin to consider what are the cues of danger. Right. And so what the nervous system needs is to reduce cues of danger. We can't resolve them for a long time, but reduce them and actively experience enough cues of safety so that the equation balance is a bit more cues of safety than danger. And that's I love that part of beginning therapy, because we're always identifying, what's the cue of danger? What's the cue of safety? And we do it on and on and on, because I can have a wonderful relationship with a client, and in a moment something happens. And then I stop and go, wow, some cue of danger just came in and totally brought us out of connection. Let's bring some curiosity to what it was, right? We're always exploring that. Yeah.
And this is the intriguing thing, because because of the way that neuroception works, you have no way of knowing. You might blink in a certain way, and that's a cue of danger. And you don't, when you're working with somebody new, or even someone you know really well, there's no telling from your experience of the world what those...
My experience just tells me that something happened, And then it's my job to bring that into the space between us and name it and help my client begin to consider what it might have been, because my client probably doesn't know either, right? Because with many people, you know, who have had early relational trauma and have some sort of a insecure or disorganized attachment, you know, there's some flavor that feels familiar and the nervous system takes them. And so it's really, you know, we're explorers, which I kind of love. I love being an explorer. And then it's like bringing my client into this with me. Let's explore together. You know, there's no shame or no blame or no judgment about what just happened. It's your nervous system doing something, and let's find out why. Yeah.
Ella's got a little question.
Oh, good.
It's for being in shutdown, and the shutdown actually helps you get into social engagement, because with our guinea pigs, I know that if they're like in a hiding place or somewhere dark, they're more likely to be friendly than if they're in an open space. So if they've been able to like retreat into like we have these hay houses that are quite small, so it's like a dark enclosed space. If they've been able to do that, then they'll be much more friendly when they come out. Whereas if they've been like out in the open, then they're really jumpy and stuff.
Right. So rather than thinking about dorsal vagal state, if we think about what are the cues of safety for your guinea pig. And for your guinea pig, the cues of safety are being in an enclosed space where they feel cozy. And the cues of danger might be being out in the open where they can't, they don't know from what side to look. So, you know, they're very wise in finding the place that brings them a cue of safety, and they can go there and feel it and then come back out when they feel enough of those cues of safety. Yeah, absolutely. That's a lovely example of really knowing. So you know with your guinea pigs that they need places to go because those are their cues of safety. Yeah. And with humans, we haven't quite gotten the same level of awareness, have we? Humans need places to go that feel as though they're filled with cues of safety. And for many humans right now, we're having a hard time finding those environments that feel like they have cues of safety.
We've got another animal situation at home at the moment, which I think is very interesting in relation to all this polyvagal stuff. So the office we're sitting in had the rodent. We're seeing signs that someone was here and that, you know, they were chewing things. But I think the rodent must have got really hungry or thirsty. It turned out to be a little short-tailed field vole, which is really interesting because, of course, Stephen's wife, something Carter, isn't it? Is it Nancy Carter?
So, yeah.
Sue Carter. She developed her theory around oxytocin with prairie voles, but I believe they're in the same genus as our little short-tailed field vole. And this is a baby short-tailed field vole which somehow wandered in here. So obviously become independent, came in here looking for food. You know, this is going to ruin my credentials as a person talking about wildness, because we have actually caught that vole and we're keeping it in a box at home. But it connects with my childhood. We used to rescue voles from the cat, and then I'd have a pet vole for a while. So it means something to my memory, even though.
I love it.
And the thing got to the point where it would sit on my shoulder. And now the thing is, they're known to be easy to tame, and I feel it must be something to do with why Sue found voles such a good subject matter to explore the notion of bonding and oxytocin. So anyway, what we've got is a very frightened little baby vole thinking, "Where's my mum?" And of course, it's terribly mean of us to do this, but I'm really fascinated with. It's a place for a start, it's a place of safety for all of us when we go in to handle that vole at the moment. But we're seeing it gradually get less freaked out. And so what we're doing is we're getting it. I'm showing the kids, look, we get it on our hands, and be still. As soon as it stops moving, you stop moving, and it just kind of sits there, and then it goes and starts cleaning itself. And think, okay, you feel a little bit safe now because you're cleaning it. And every day it's getting a little bit. So basically, the story is that this little animal is learning that we are a safe space. That's what I was just going to say. And we're watching the process of it. Instead of thinking we're a cue of threat and danger. I've seen this with lots of voles before. It takes a little bit of handling for a couple of weeks.
It's really good.
And then they're not afraid of you at all, and they just run onto your hand and you feed them. And there's not at the point where we promise yet.
So sweet, yeah.
Like when we first got it, like if you picked it up, it would just run up your arm, and then you had to get it down, and it will run up again. Always trying to escape, and it's bitten Kit twice now.
Oh.
But now it, like if you get it, it will stay still unless you move, and it just sits in your hand. And it started vibrating, which I think is like a relaxed or like bonding rodents, because if we're cuddling our guinea pigs, so it was vibrating in Kit's hand. It's so sweet.
You know, and what you're talking about in offering a safe welcome to your little vole is the same thing we do to humans around us, is to offer a safe welcome, right? How do we just come into connection in a way that feels safe to a vole or a human being? Yeah.
It's funny though, because you alluded to silence a little while ago, and of course that's the last thing you'd want to do in a situation where people don't know each other, unfortunately. But with this thing where we go absolutely still and just go, okay, now you've got space. Sadly, we can't do that with other humans. You have to fill the space with.
Yeah, it's harder certainly with other humans. Although, you know, if we sat for a moment together in just, you know, sharing our ventral energies, there's a limit to each person's nervous system's ability to tolerate silence, because silence is often neurocepted as a cue of danger. So we're playing around with that line there. Whereas for your vole, stillness is apparently a cue of safety.
Yeah, it seems to be.
Love it. Love it. Oh, what a lovely conversation with you guys.
Yeah, thanks so much, Deb.
It's been lovely to show up. And any last thoughts?
I have a question of the moment. With so much being on video at the moment, and so much connection happening over screens, how do you make sure that you're conveying safety when you get on video and get on a video call to teach or to? Yeah.
You know, I name it, and I ask, and I you know, talk each time to my client or who I'm doing consultation with, or when I'm teaching, I'll put it out there in the beginning. Just, you know, let's just take a moment and just want to see if you can feel my regulation, because it's about my regulation, right? If I'm regulated, I can offer that regulating energy to the world, you know, to other people, whether they're on a screen or not, to come into connection. So for me, it's this explicit conversation that you know, we're having. And then, you know, as we move through a session, it's that tracking and asking, you know, and does it still, because even though we're not together, we can still feel that this moment of, oh, something just happened there, right? You know, and on screens it's hard because there's a bit of delay and voice, and there's, so one of the things that I find it fascinating though is what this screen is sort of demanding we do is to slow down a bit, to give time between talking and listening, because of the delay that's built in. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Yeah. You can't just dive in with the first thought that comes. In fact, Miles and I were both doing it at the beginning of the call. We were like, and you can't do that. You have to let things unfold, watch for a pause, take. Yeah, it's really true.
Yeah.
Well, it's true because the thing is, I think the way this technology works is that two people actually can't speak at the same time. So
the microphone.
Interrupting is never a good thing, but you kind of sort of get your knuckles wrapped for doing it in this context because it's really disruptive.
It's like a virtual talking stick, the kind of traditional idea of you pass the stick around, and I guess there's something in that just about the unfamiliarity of it. I remember when video was just becoming a thing, and to just see somebody on video that you'd been getting emails from, suddenly there's a video from them, was mind-blowing. And the thought of recording yourself on video seemed so brave, and then being able to see someone on a live video was just like the end of the world. And so there's a nervous system shock with the newness of it and the strangeness of it. And I don't think it's all that different from how Indigenous people used to respond to having their photos taken. Like, exactly. I think there's some kind of response that we have to that. And you were just talking about settling in bit by bit. People are kind of discovering that it's not horrendous to talk on video and to be seen, and so those I think it's a really good point. It's just becoming more familiar now, isn't it?
Because unfamiliar is often a cue of danger to many, especially to clients. Unfamiliar was never a good thing in their history. So unpredictable, unfamiliar, all of that are cues of danger. So when they become less unfamiliar, we do them more, and we build in what are we going to do if our internet stops. We talk about those things beforehand so that we've pre-planned. It makes it all easier.
So that's a really nice way, that's a really nice kind of full circle actually of sort of this question of like, what do we do about this? And the answer is we just let our nervous system get used to it and settle and get comfortable. And so it's not actually how do we do connecting online, how do we do, it's the same routine of what makes us feel safe. What's okay, how do we get comfortable?
We didn't lose any of our skills just because we're not sitting in an office together, right? It's just that we have to be more explicit in what we're doing and invite our clients to be more co-creative with us. So I think it's actually, in some ways, don't want it to go on forever, but at the moment there's an opportunity here to learn something important. So
I think there's another aspect to it. Like, I mean, I'm generally pretty wary of how technology can take things away from us in terms of presence, connectivity, and so on. But we had, so I belong to a group called the Association of Foragers, mostly in the UK, but there's a few from the States and elsewhere. But we had to put our heads together about a project we're working on. During the lockdown, and I ended up having I think there was 16 people on my screen. First time I'd done a Zoom meeting with I've only ever done a Skype thing with I think 3 people once. But suddenly there were 16 people, and there they were all on my screen. I could see everybody's face, and I felt like a child in a sweet shop. All these lovely people that I normally have to drive an extraordinarily long way to get to see. And thinking about it, there is a dysregulating thing, at least I find this, to traveling. You get there, you're exhausted, A, and then B, you're in this strange place that's not any of your space. Actually, last time I saw this lot, it was one of their spaces. It was a chap called Dan in Wales. We're in his house. But everyone else is in a strange place. My body's still feeling funny because of this long journey. All this unfamiliarity and lack of cues of safety. Actually, the dysregulating factors of the technology, I realized, were massively less. I'm in my own space, in my office, familiar place, and now I've got all these lovely people. I can just see their faces on the screen.
Actually, I'm the opposite. I prefer it, and I really like arriving after a long journey and like looking around and stuff, and then like relaxing. And I don't really like seeing people on screen because I don't find it as like
well, I think we've learned something there, that your body is not dysregulated by traveling. Mine definitely is, but that's sweet. I feel social.
I like that being in the car though, so that's probably why I like riding so much. Like after the journey.
So I will say for me, I travel all over the world now every day, and I love it because I do it right from here. Like I'm in the UK now, and later today I'm going to Ireland, and it's just lovely. The ways that I can travel the world without having to pack my suitcase and get on an airplane and do all that. So in some ways I'm kind of loving this. Yeah. It feels like we're globally connected in a way that we might not have been before this. And I think there's great, there's something wonderful there that we need to hold on to. So, yeah.
Well, that
all right. So,
sorry, do you need to
I need to go in a couple of minutes. So go ahead, finish your statement there.
Do my sort of wrap up thought was just that the whole kind of connection and relational thing with nervous systems towards, you know, we looked at it earlier, our own body and other people, and then places. But I think there's something that perhaps is going to come stronger with people's sense of how they actually form an emotional bond with the landscape where they actually live. And the opportunity we've got right now is because we're not supposed to be going somewhere else, you know, we're supposed to be staying here. And I think that's probably people are probably discovering that the fact of not moving around so much does give this kind of ventral vagal thing of just, you just settle down here.
Yes, it's either going to bring that, which is, you know, what we hope for lots of people, or it's going to take us into a place where we recognize that where we are is not home for us.
Yeah, that's true.
That we're misplaced, where we're in a place that doesn't feel safe and welcoming. So that there's, you know, a lot of learning that's going on for people right now.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Deb.
It was lovely to meet the three of you, and I'd love to hear the work you're doing, and let's stay in touch. How about that?
Fantastic. Yeah, it's an absolute joy to talk to you. And
All right. So have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Okay, thank you for joining us for this week's WorldWild Podcast. And as always, there's links to things mentioned in the podcast on the show notes, which you can find at forager.org.uk/podcast. And we'll put some stuff up there about my sister Alice's work and also some bits and bobs about Deb. So, yeah, it just remains to talk a little bit about what you could be foraging, gathering and eating just now. It's elderflower season, and every year I find more things to do with elderflowers. This week we've had some fun because we're working on the zine, which should be out next week. If you are particularly keen to distribute some copies for us, do let me know. The idea is to get this. It's going to be called Eat Wild, and the idea is to get it in the hands of people that are interested in foraging, or you think would be interested in foraging if given a little bit of help. So it's sort of entry-level stuff. It's a free zine. So the idea is to get it in the hands of people that wouldn't be able to pay for it if it wasn't free. But perhaps there might be a way to get it available at a point of sale for people who can afford to pay. We're going to be exploring that. But anyway, we've been doing recipes for that. And one of the things that was suggested was that we look at how to help people to get wild food in their diet when they don't even have much interest in cooking. So we've made suggestions about chopping it into baked beans for baked beans on toast. And also Robin Harford said we've got to do pot noodle. Lots of people are really keen on pot noodle. And if you just chop some wild plants and put it in your pot noodle, well, it's going to be a much better pot noodle. So I've gone out and bought some pot noodle, and we tried adding plantain and elderflower to the pot noodle. And I have to say it really worked. Adds a good bit of texture and flavor, especially to the chicken and mushroom one. And the reason I did that was because I've been working on a soup that would also be incredibly basic. And I called it wild chicken soup. It's basically a stock cube, some chopped potatoes. You cook the potatoes in the stock, dissolved in a liter of water, and then about 5 minutes from the end, you add a whole load of elderflowers, and then you chop some plantain leaves and pour the soup on top of that, and that's your wild chicken soup. And it did seem to really, I thought it would work because chicken and elderflower is a really good flavor combination. but it worked better than I thought it would. So that's got me inspired to just add elderflower to more things, really. I've been just putting it in salads. I guess that's nothing new, but basically, you can put elderflower in with peas or cabbage. Just stir some butter or oil in there and add some elderflower, and you're basically using it as a flavoring. You can put it in a bag with potatoes. It will put the flavor inside the potatoes. Also, really good. Again, with chicken gravy. And by the way, if you want to do a real chefy soup, you can make your own stock, but it really does work with that crumbled stock cube. And if you're veggie or vegan, of course, you can use just vegetable stock. You'll miss out on that magic chicken synergy there, but it's still a really good option. And the large leaves of plantain are just great at the moment. They're crunchy. I had some toast with a nice goat's cheese the other day, and I just felt it was missing something. And I just put some long plantain leaves on top of that toast, on top of the cheese, and it was just great. The texture and the flavor, it just really worked. So I'm not sure if I've described plantain before, but anyway, I'll do it again. So ribwort plantain is a long, thin leaf, and it's really easy to identify because it has parallel veins. Most leaves have one long vein up the middle and then veins like branches going out to the edges. Plantains, they don't. They just have long veins going from the top to the bottom. It makes them easy to recognize. And then they have these fun little flower heads at the moment. And actually you can make a soup with that as well. So because plantain tastes like mushrooms, and especially the flower heads, you could take those flower heads and just blitz them in. Again, I'd recommend chicken stock. Blitz them in chicken stock and infuse that for maybe a minute or so and strain it out. For some reason, it gets bitter if you leave it for longer than that. And then you can add butter and cream and whatever luxurious thing. Again, you can go plant-based with this and not use the animal fats or the chicken stock, just veg stock. But it's just occurred to me now that I should redo that recipe and add elderflowers. Makes me want to go back to that recipe and redo it for the zine. I think it's too late. Never mind. Anyway, so that would be a wild chicken and mushroom soup. So you can make two soups or blend them together as I've just suggested. So there's a couple of thoughts. Elderflowers everywhere, plantains everywhere. Should be really easy for anyone to get out there and find those two plants somewhere close to where you live. Okay, so thanks again for listening to this week's WorldWild Podcast.
I don't wanna be a trigger to you, a trigger to you. I don't wanna see you become edgy and wrong, 'cause I've seen that before. Let's choose one and all, not to stumble but to walk tall. Let's keep it safe and social. I don't wanna be a problem to you with the things that I do. And I don't wanna see you shut down and weak, not able to speak. Let's all get back into health, growth, restoration and thriving. Keep it safe and social. I wanna be a cure of safety to you, of safety to you. Your vocal prosody was like a song to me, like safe sounds in a tune, makes a safe sound and a tune. Let's make our presence gentle, let's witness and not be so judgmental. Let's keep it safe and social. Let's make our presence gentle, Let's witness and not be so judgmental. Let's keep it safe and social.